Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hi,
Dana.
Joe. I'm Dana.
Yeah, Joe, and we are
Crazy.
crazy. All right, so we're wedding photographers with Buchanan Photography, and we also run Dana, Joe & Co., which is an educational brand, and this is our YouTube channel / also repurposed content, which goes on Facebook too.
Welcome.
Yeah, welcome. Today we're going to be talking about raw photos. So the question is, should you be shooting in RAW? So if you have no idea what RAW is, then this is probably a good place for you as well. But if you also do know what RAW is, but just never thought about it, then this is also a great video for you as well, because we're going to talk about both the pros and cons of RAW versus JPEG, right? So everybody knows what JPEG is, and everyone's heard of JPEG, even I wouldn't go that far. My dad does not know what JPEG is. But the most common file format for photos are JPEG, right? So
Yeah.
what the heck is a RAW file, right? So when we first got into business, did you know what RAW was, like when you started shooting, or did you just know?
No, I had, when Laura flipped my camera settings on for me, it was in medium RAW.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So when we first started out, Dana actually worked under someone else who basically said, hey, you need to shoot in medium RAW. We're like, okay, sounds good. But we obviously had no idea what that had.
But she had just discovered that. So
Right.
for the previous, I believe, and if Laura had this wrong and you ever see this, I'm sorry. It was like the previous 3 years or 4 years she was shooting in JPEG.
Yeah.
It wasn't, RAW wasn't a big thing then. It was when the DSLRs, I think it was the Mark IIs came out, people jumped on this like RAW bandwagon.
Yeah.
And if that's not right, correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. So there are certain videos on this channel that you're going to find that we are absolutely not pros with when it comes to technical things, but that's full transparency. But there is one thing that we do is we actually research. So I actually researched some of this information so that you guys get some good guidance on this. But here's why, right? At the end of the day, my goal is to be a good business owner. I want to deliver the best photo, the best product to my couple. If I don't have to learn all the tech, get super nitty gritty into it, then there's no need for that, right? I just need to know enough so that what I'm producing and handing over to the couple at the end of the day is the best that I can possibly do. So I know that the best way to produce a photograph is with a RAW file. And I'm actually going to go down and talk about all those pros right now. So basically, RAW file is how the camera is processing. So you take a picture, and then it comes into the camera, and the camera has a sensor. So we're talking, we're not talking film, obviously, right?
No, we're talking DSLR.
We're talking digital cameras. Excuse me. So there's a sensor in there, and then all the light's coming in, and then it's creating an image, right? So with a RAW file, you are, no kidding, capturing the most amount of data that your camera can possibly capture.
Yeah.
Whereas,
files are huge.
Yeah. Whereas a JPEG is actually doing a little bit of post-processing for you in the camera. So a RAW is another way you think of it as a negative, right? So you take a picture with a film camera, you get the negative, and then you have to take it home, and then you got to post-process it. Well, that's a RAW file is essentially, I need to get a drink.
Don't stop it because it's good.
I know.
He's choking on popcorn.
I had some popcorn, and now I'm choking on a kernel. So essentially what's happening is you're creating a digital negative that you have to go home and post-process, where you could post-process a JPEG, right? You could post-process a JPEG, but it's extremely difficult. I didn't realize how difficult until one time I actually shot in JPEG and not RAW, because
By accident.
I did it by accident, and then I put it in Lightroom, and I started to try and process, and I was like, what's going on here? Like, I can't get the photos to look the way I want them to look.
And he couldn't figure it out. And then I looked at it and I was like, honey, check the settings on the camera.
Yeah.
Sure could be.
It was JPEG.
And I think you had flipped it in a JPEG because it was a baby shower or something. And we were just running around taking photos and we didn't really care to edit them.
Right. So,
Needless to say.
anyways, that's what I learned. So you're recording all the data from your sensor. You're putting your sensor to work.
Yep.
All right. It also records a greater level of brightness, right? So JPEG, up to a certain point, it stops at a level of brightness. RAW is getting a higher level of brightness, right? So why is that important? Because now in post-processing, right, we are wedding photographers. There's certain moments during the day where we're running around. I just need to get the shot.
Yeah.
But I'm shooting in manual, so I may not have been paying attention to my settings, or I may have been off a little bit. So that photo may be overexposed or underexposed. Now, because it's a raw file format, I can actually go back and fix a lot of that in Lightroom.
It doesn't look.
Whereas JPEG, you can't.
No.
Like you got what you have in camera. You can do some minor adjustments. But when you have a raw file, you can really save a lot of photos. So that's one of the biggest pros of that, right? It also allows you to adjust white balance, whereas JPEG, you can't. Like, you can adjust the white balance a little bit. So if you're not nailing the white balance in camera, like when you go to post-process a JPEG, you can't really do much about that. Whereas,
so you're gonna lose the detail of your dress, things like
100%.
that. You
Whereas,
can control
like,
that more with raw.
With raw, like let's say your photo's blue, right? And you want it a little bit warmer, or you just want good neutral colors, you can do that with a raw file, right? All right, so when you use Lightroom, right? Lightroom uses algorithms and all kinds of crazy math to help process your raw files. Now, when you import a JPEG file, you cannot adjust sharpening or noise. But when you have a raw file, Lightroom actually opens up its algorithms and allows you to do that. So now you can adjust for noise. So, you know, when you have high ISO and you're shooting at nighttime and you get a lot of grain in your photo, you can actually, if you use a raw file and go into Lightroom, you can actually use Lightroom to actually reduce that. You can't completely get rid of it, but you can reduce it to a point where you're actually like, hey, I can live with this, right? But sometimes we also like to sharpen photos, right? So maybe it's a detail of a ring or a detail of a flower or somebody's eye or something that you really want to stand out. You can actually sharpen that and make it super crystal clear. Or you can just sharpen the whole image in general so that you can have sharper photos. I already talked about this where you can edit without losing quality. So this was actually eye-opening, something I learned. Every time that you make a change to a JPEG, you can't go back, right? And every time you save it and make a change, like the quality of the JPEG actually goes down. I never knew this before. This is a learning for me. Whereas with a raw file, that raw file is good for the rest of your life. You can make changes,
alter it, change it,
export it. Because I've gone back like 3-4 years later just to look at old weddings, and I'm like, well, I want to try a new editing style on this just to see what it looks like. And you can re-edit it, and there's zero loss of quality. Whereas JPEG, you're stuck, right? And then it's going to keep losing quality over and over. So those are all the pros. So basically, you're using the maximum ability of your camera. You're getting the most data into your camera that you possibly can, but it gives you the opportunity to really do a lot in post-processing, like really change a lot with highlights, with shadows, with color, and you can correct a lot of things, especially if you make mistakes throughout the day. But I think that's
more
really
control.
It gives you more control with editing. So I think that really is where creativity comes into play, where people are like, hey, look at my editing style, right? If I had a JPEG, we'd all be limited, but since we're all using raw files, right?
And I think that's where the art comes in. That's where the craft comes in. That's where your personal touch gets put on an image and sets you apart from other people.
Absolutely, 100%.
So what are some cons?
So cons, all right? It needs to be processed, right? So if I shoot JPEG, I can pull the JPEG directly off camera, right?
You could use it.
So typically when I use JPEG, I'm using it like if I'm just goofing off around the house, taking pictures of the kids or family, and I don't want to have to sit there and process it. Like, it takes a long time, right? So I'll switch to JPEG, take pictures, and I can just download them straight to a computer. Whereas RAW, you can't. You need something to process those. So obviously the industry standard is Lightroom, where you can use Photoshop, right? So you got the post-processing. But remember, we're creatives, right? So I'm assuming that you are in business of photography. So one of the things that you're going to be doing is trying to create the best image that's possible and putting your own touch on it. So you're going to want to post-process it anyway. But if you don't, that's a con, right? The other thing is larger space. Like if you look at a RAW file versus a JPEG file, you're looking at 3 to 4 times larger. So if you got 1 megabyte JPEG, the RAW is going to be close to 3 to 4 megabytes just for one file. Now, I could see years ago this being a huge issue, right? Because storage was expensive, memory cards are expensive. But we're in a great time right now as photographers, digital photographers, where I mean,
hard drives are endless.
I can get a 2, 3, 4 terabyte hard drive for $150. Like that's insane, the amount of space. And same thing with the cards for your camera, right? It's super cheap. But obviously, you know, we got stacks of hard drives in our house because
We keep them.
we keep everything as a backup. So if we ever need to reference it or if anything happens, we can go back and use it.
Yeah.
But it uses a lot of space.
Oh yeah, totally.
Finally, I see this being the biggest factor with wedding photographers, right? There's a lot of moving pieces on the day. You're trying to capture some key shots and you're trying to take a lot of photos fast. Because the raw file is so large, your camera is going to take those pictures, but what's going to end up happening is this happens to me at least 2 to 3 times per wedding, where you actually have to stop and pause and let your camera actually, the camera card, your compact flash card or your SD card actually catch up, because the files are so large, right? It's trying to write that information to your memory cards, so it's doing it as fast as it possibly can. And we try to use the fastest cards on the market, right? So you pay a little bit extra, you get cards where you can actually see the write speed. But the biggest issue with that is when those files are coming over, like you'll have to pause, right? So you may miss a moment during the wedding day where you're, you know, it's something special and you're just trying to capture as many of those photos as you possibly can because it's so amazing. But then all of a sudden you're gonna be like, oh, why isn't my shutter, you know, firing off? Oh, it's because my camera's trying to catch up processing those photos over to the memory card. So.
But then that also could be a pro because that makes you more intentional with those moments, and then you're not like ammo shooting.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest thing that I see is like when we say, hey, jump, right? Hey, do a jumping photo or do some kind of movement photo where I'm just like, you know, finger down on the trigger, trying to get as many of those as possible. But, you know, at the same time, like I'm going to have to get them to pause before they do the next round. So that's pros and cons of shooting RAW. So if you guys got any questions, comments, there's a ton of YouTube videos. I actually went down a rabbit hole. It was kind of funny watching people talk about JPEG versus RAW on YouTube. And people were just absolutely like, it was like battle of like which one to go for. I'm like, is it really that big of a deal?
Just shoot RAW. Medium RAW.
Yeah, shoot medium RAW is what we do. So I just wanted to share some pros and cons with you guys and give some thought and consideration to this topic. So if you got any questions, hit us up. Otherwise, go ahead and give us a subscribe on YouTube. Or if you're on Facebook, come on and join us on the Booking Lab.
Give us a thumbs up.
Thumbs up.
And comment away.
We'd love to have you in there.
Yep. All right, guys.
Bye. We'll see you in the next video.